Welcome. I'm Sarah Hewins, and I'm here today with Steve Ward and Brian Wick. Steve is the Vice President of the Board of Directors for the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association, and Brian is the Executive Director of the Cape Cod Cranberry Association. Thank you both for coming to be here with us.
Happy to be here.
Maybe we should start with you, Brian, if you could give us a history of the cranberry industry, the cranberry berries.
Sure, yeah. So cranberries are a native fruit to the United States, in particular this region. So they've been growing here for thousands of years. When the glaciers came through, cranberries plants were left behind, so they've been growing here for 10, 20,000 years. They were very important to the indigenous people. They were very much part of their diet. They would use the cranberry, mix it with meat, and it helped preserve the meat. It was called pemmican, and so that was very important to their diet, as well as just eating the berries themselves. They also used it as a sweetener, much as we do today as well. They used it as a dye. It also had some medicinal purposes, so it was very much integral into their lives. And then when the Europeans came, they were introduced to the cranberry, and curiously they called it a cranberry, because the flower of the cranberry plant looks very similar to the sandhill crane, that they were familiar with it. And somewhere over the years we lost that extra E, it's just a cranberry now. So it was again part of the colonists' food as well, and it really didn't start as a commercial entity until 1816. And on Dennis, Massachusetts, a retired captain from the Revolutionary War named Henry Hall noticed that the storms, when they blew sand onto the wild cranberry plants, that they performed better and they started to grow better. And so he started adding sand to them and kind of shaping them, and he gets credit for starting the cranberry industry. So in 200 plus years we've grown from those wild beginnings to where we are today. But the cranberry plant is found here. It's a natural wetland plant. It's growing in the exact same conditions that nature intended to have it, so we're very fortunate to have that in our area. We have about 13,000 acres approximately of producing cranberry bog, and Carver has the most cranberries in the state.
Really? That's awesome. So can you give us a little bit of a background on how the growers went from what's called dry picking to wet picking, although there's some dry picking that still happens today?
Right. So when cranberries were first cultivated, they were picked by hand. And the growers would
Use my scoop.
then the scoop, but literally by hand first.
Okay.
And they would line up strings in the bog, and you would pick in your rows. So each worker would go down their rows, and they would put them into these quarts, and they'd get paid by how many pails they would fill up in a day. And then in the mid-1800s, the small snap scoop was invented. It's a very small scoop that you'd have in your hand, and then shortly thereafter, the rocker scoop that you brought here was developed. And this really changed the industry. You could pick much faster with that. It's very labor intensive, Steve.
In many cases, there'd be hundreds of people on the bog at one time, with typically the mom being the lead person, scooping because the father was off working his regular job, and kids would get a couple weeks off during harvest season, and they would help to bring the cranberries off the bogs and set them on the dike. Now you had to have one kid just standing guard because there was a lot of swiping of boxes.
Yeah.
So
Really?
until the tally man came to tally up and give you a slip, you had to keep an eye on the boxes. You had to walk back and forth carrying the boxes, which for a little guy it's quite a task, but very good exercise.
There's tales of fist fights that broke out in the bog sometimes over whose berries were whose and things like that. So it could be a little rough and tumble sometimes out there.
Oh, because they were paid by the box.
Because they were paid by the box, right?
So Dom Fernandez, his father and mom were very instrumental in the cranberry industry in the 50s, 60s, and through there. Dom Fernandez married his wife Tina because she was one of the only women who could scoop 100 boxes a day, which was quite a challenge. So Tina just recently passed away a couple of years ago, so I mentioned that story to her daughter, and I said, Terry, I love the story about your dad marrying your mom because, 100 boxes a day. And she says, well, you don't know the other side of the story. I said, what's that? She says, she expected the same of him. So it was quite a thing. If you could do 100 boxes in a day,
That's a lot.
I mean, that's an amazing feat.
So it stayed as scooping right through until the 1940s when the first mechanical harvester was developed. They developed one in the 1920s called the Mathewson picker. It was actually like a small car almost. You could drive it, but it was not particularly popular. There's a few of them kicking around now as antiques, but really it was the hand scoop. And there was one grower that I heard stories of that he thought the scoop was too damaging to the vines, and he wouldn't allow it on his bogs. And so there was one grower anyway who still had his workers picked by hand. But in the 1940s, the mechanical harvester was developed, and they're still basically the same machine that's used today in dry harvesting. There hasn't been really any major advancements. There's 3 different styles of dry harvest machines, and they're like I think of them as a lawnmower-sized machine, and they have combs in the front, and they comb through the bog, and the berries are collected up, just like these tines.
Only they're bigger.
Right, and they go onto a conveyor. Yep, they convey up into a burlap bag, and the bag fills up, and you set it down, and you keep going, and then someone else comes along, picks up the burlap bags. Now they dump them into plastic crates, but they used to be wooden crates, and they'll fill up a crate, and a crate can hold about 300 pounds of fruit, and then they'll put another crate on top of that, fill that one up, and do it a third time.
Just like Legos.
Yeah, yep. Yeah. And now that holds, you're talking close to 1,000 pounds now, and then a helicopter will come and lift them off the bog onto a truck. Now if you're a smaller operation, the helicopter is pretty expensive,
right.
So you might not have that step. Some growers will just carry the burlap bags off the bog that way, but so that's still done, but very small percentage. It's about 4% of cranberries are harvested dry, and that is shrinking a little bit each year.
Do the helicopter lift off?
What's that?
That use the helicopter?
They do dry harvesting.
Oh, just dry harvesting.
Just dry harvesting is about 4% or a little bit less. So it's still, I think, a very important part of the business, certainly iconic. That's what people see in the stores, the fresh fruit, farmers markets, that type of thing. But it's a very small percentage of the industry today. The other one is wet harvest. So that was developed in the 1960s. And that's what most people think of with cranberries now with harvest. They flood the bogs with water. Water reel drives out there, separates the berries from the vines. They float to the surface, corral them, pump them off the bog. So those berries are destined to become juice, sweetened dried cranberries, cranberry sauce, so anything other than the fresh fruit. So that was...
Yeah, and so many people ask me whether I prefer wet picking or dry picking, and I always say, if you ask me to pick for a day, dry picking is by far my favorite because it becomes kind of a family event and it's fun. But when somebody says you have to pick 100 acres, I'm going to pick with water, because you can pick so much faster, so much easier. Yeah,
there's a lot of reasons why we're not seeing the dry harvest. It's much more labor. It has 3 or 4 times the amount of people that you need for a wet harvest operation. Much slower, and it's more efficient to pick wet as well. You get more of the fruit off the bog. By the nature of the machines, if you don't have perfectly level bogs, which many of our bogs are not, you leave some of the fruit behind. So that there's a lot of factors, and with climate change, we could talk about this all day, but with climate change is also making it harder to pick fresh, because the fresh fruit in Massachusetts has to be picked dry, like perfectly dry, no dew, no moisture on those bogs at all. And as a result, with the wet falls that we've been having and the warm nights, so you're not getting the cooling effect, it's very hard to find the window to dry harvest. So that, coupled with the longer time that it takes, the more people that you need, hard to find labor. So we're going down.
And I've always said that if you're a small operation and you have plenty of family, and you can pick maybe on Columbus Day weekend, you make a big event of it, pizza, all kinds of food, it works out well to do dry picking. And as long as the help is for free.
Yeah.
But then if you're talking about getting like another 100 acres done, it's far more efficient just to, I mean, you can have a 5-man crew to do 100 acres and get it done very easily in a season.
Yeah.
So that's the history, but if you have more, do you want to go down, you don't want to talk about product development or that sort of thing, or is that part
Well, I
of?
was thinking too, back in the day when they used the railroad, there was a railroad behind High Street, and I think, wasn't that used to deliver the berries? Maybe I'm wrong.
It was very common to have, your cranberries were packed at the farm where they were harvested. Which today it's mostly done somewhere else at a bigger manufacturing facility. You harvest the cranberries and you bring it somewhere.
Okay.
It was quite typical to do that all on the farm. And they had screen houses. We still have a few of them around, but those too are disappearing.
Yeah.
But so what the growers would do is they'd have their screen house on their property. They'd screen the berries, put them into boxes, and then they would need to ship them somewhere. So having freight or access to that was very important. So Steve may know more about the history in Carver specifically.
So prior to the co-op, also known as Ocean Spray, there were hundreds of different cranberry labels. So there was a lot of competition, and there was almost like an exchange area where everybody delivered the cranberries for the market. So there was an awful lot of competition. Railroads obviously were very important back in the early 1900s. But once Ocean Spray was created in 1930 or so, things were more consolidated. And cranberry sauce during World War II, was it? Was a very important staple sent over to the troops. Not only was it, something very tasty, it was also good because it was high in antioxidants, high in vitamin C, and actually pretty good for the guys. So, but prior to that, it was just, I would say, almost a little chaotic in the way it was like it's being on the floor of a stock exchange. It's controlled chaos. But then things started to consolidate to this point now, where there are only about a half a dozen handlers throughout the United States and Canada.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Ocean Spray. You said it's a co-op.
So Ocean Spray was created by 3 growers back in 1930, and Marcus Uran was kind of the leader of it, and he just felt that we would be much more able to sell cranberries by having us all working together instead of working against each other. So cranberry sauce was the primary product at that point, and then cranberry juice, which are both still very popular. And then, about 1980, someone discovered that, if we take all the shells and hulls that we throw away and make that into a product kind of like raisins, only we call them craisins at Ocean Spray, sweetened dried cranberries, and now the byproduct isn't the shells anymore, it's the concentrate that's later made for juice. So the sweetened dried has really taken off, and it's a great product because you don't have to have them refrigerated. You can ship them anywhere in the world, and if somebody messes up and doesn't have them refrigerated, it's not going to be a problem.
Yeah.
But, right now, the sweetened dried are actually driving the industry, and the co-op is made up of basically small farms, 700 growers or so. So and Ocean Spray is about 65% of the industry. Very important, though, are all the other handlers, and it's important to know that we don't compete that way either. And cranberry growers work together, whether they're an independent handler or a cooperative grower. We have each other's backs. We want to make sure that the industry survives, and I think the unity there and the unity provided by the co-op all lend themselves to keep the industry healthy.
That's a very interesting point, that you work together and no one's competing, really.
We do.
Yeah, we're small. In the world of agriculture, we're pretty small. Cranberries are small, and in Massachusetts, we're not an ag state.
Right.
You know, in the Midwest, ag is very much at the forefront, but not in Massachusetts. We have our other industries that we think of before, so we need to stick together and work together, and we've been very successful at that.
I can see that. So Steve, tell me, if you will, how your family got into cranberry growing.
Well, a lot of folks in the town of Carver know my dad, Dick Ward, and he was a physical education teacher. So that's very, very important to know, because that was the driving force to him buying the cranberry bog. He would prefer, he bought it for the exercise. The profit was, about number 3. So so he bought that bog in about 1972. We only had about 3 acres at the time, and as I said, he was a teacher, so it turned out to be a really good summer job for him. It also turned out to be a good summer job for all 5 of his kids, and many of the tasks that some of the larger growers use heavy equipment to do was all done by hand. So, ditch digging was all by hand. Sanding the bog. We were the only grower I know of that had a sander, and we would shovel to fill the sander. We could. My dad was as a phys ed teacher. He was a coach too, and so he would recruit the wrestling team, and they'd come out and we'd shovel. And he would say, "Okay, when I back this sander into the sand pit, I want you guys to shovel like crazy. Your rest is while I'm out spreading the sand on the ice." And so we could shovel or fill that sander in 1 minute and 30 seconds. So it was pretty impressive.
It's impressive.
Yeah. And my mom, of course, she would come out with the cookies and the hot cocoa halfway in between. But it made it, growing up in the cranberry industry was fun. Eventually, each year we would build a new bog, and my dad felt that 14, 15 acres is a nice sized operation for him to retire to at some point. And that's right about where we ended up, and we do a little bit of solar to kind of dovetail in with the cranberries, but it's worked out very. He's 83 years old, and he still does the majority of the work around the cranberry bog. So.
Well, that makes me remember when I first moved to Carver in 1992. We had just moved here from Mississippi, where they farm catfish. And they farm them in these pools. They're sort of oblong with dike roads around them. So we were up here in March of 92, and there was snow on the bogs. And I turned to my husband and I said, "Do they have catfish here?" And he looked at me like I was crazy. He said, "No, Sarah, these are cranberry bogs, but it looks just like it." So that was my first introduction. And then when my son was born, I remember watching the helicopters. I thought they were strafing our house. I didn't know what the heck was going on. So I called the Plymouth Airport, and the manager was very nice. He said, "Oh, no, these are expert pilots. They're fertilizing. Everything's fine. They have to stay 500 feet. And I was like, "Looks pretty close." But he said, no, they follow the rules. They know what they're doing. And then in 1996, I got on the Conservation Commission, and your mom was on it. And she immediately grabbed me and brought me over to your house that first fall. And said, bring your husband, bring your boy, come on over here. There's something for everybody to do. So the first year, we were sorting the berries. The bad ones we would chuck. My son played on the sand pile. And 27 years later, we're still running the machines, which is pretty amazing.
We recruited you this past fall, too.
Yeah, I know.
So we always felt that it was so important to involve the neighbors so they understood what was going on. We don't really want people to think that we're keeping everything a secret.
Oh, yeah. And we would travel around to lots of different farms, not just your family's farm, but 5 or 6, I recall. So one of them was up in Halifax, I think. That was when everyone was still dry picking. More people would dry pick. Yeah. So it's a shame to lose that. I hope we don't totally lose it, but you never know.
But our philosophy was that the dry picking brought the family back together.
Yeah.
You have a core group of family that works on the bogs during the season, but during harvest it's kind of a more hands-on deck operation.
Friends and neighbors, yeah.
And you invite the neighbors, you invite people that have asked questions. Try to remember who asked about, I'd love to see harvest, and you give them a call and say, hey, come on, we're doing it this day, and weather permitting, and it makes it a lot more fun. And you kind of want the community to be engaged and understand too, and kind of have a little bit of a stake in it. And that's what I'm hoping to do in the future is get more friends and neighbors involved.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it's really good. It's good exercise, but it's also good for the community. You know?
But it was also really good from a perspective of you being the conservation agent, not to be in the cranberry grower's pocket. We don't think of it that way at all. We like to just have you educated so you understand, so you can make a better decision.
Well, one story I do tell from when I was conservation agent, when I first came in, and I know you're both familiar with farm plans. The growers are supposed to have a farm plan, and there are tons of agricultural exemptions in the wetlands regulations. And but for each exemption, the grower is supposed to show the Conservation Commission that one page from the farm plan that says, yes, I'm going to excavate, 20,000 square feet, building a tailwater recovery pond, or whatever it is. And that's an exempt activity. Well, when I first got there, I think there was one sheet from one farm plan in my filing cabinets. When I left, I had an entire drawer because people understood that the point was growers are following the regulations, they're doing what they're supposed to do, and the regulatory community was satisfied with that, and that was just the way we cooperated. So we ended up being just cooperating together rather than fighting or butting heads, which was my style, trying to cooperate and work together, like you said, with the growers.
I remember many times talking with you, and if you said no, that's not acceptable, we listened. So it's important for both sides to listen, and worked out well.
Yeah. Well, yes, but I think the thing was too that fairness, I think, came into play, because I think you understood that I was trying to be fair, obviously.
It's always the best way to regulate policy. All that is.
Yeah.
It's both sides understanding each other and having that knowledge base. So important.
Right.
We're fortunate in Carver to have that.
We are. I remember one incident where a grower a new neighborhood had just come in, backing up to a cranberry bog. And a bunch of neighbors came in and complained to me, he's cutting down trees. I said, well, within 100 feet of a cranberry bog, he can. That's an exempt activity. See here? Whatever the rule was. And this grower eventually agreed to meet with the neighbors, and he explained to them what he was doing. He's putting in a cranberry bog. And I said to him, well, I think you'd rather see that than more houses. And they were pretty happy with that. Just having him explain, having me explain.
So many times, and I have old retired school teacher that works on my operation. He takes care of a lot of the day-to-day things, Ben Hatch.
Oh, yeah.
And he has such a good way with folks. And I always said, you know, if you're on the bog and there's a neighbor outside, stop over, and I do the same thing. Try to stop over and talk to that neighbor and just kind of explain what's going on. Any questions? It's a quick 10-minute Cranberry's 101.
Right.
And it's amazing how that information gets to all the other folks in the neighborhood. But just talk about, yeah, we're going to be flooding up pretty soon for harvest. Just the little simple things. Why are we running the sprinklers all night long? and that would be because it's cold, and there's going to be damage to the bog if we don't. And it just goes an awful long way to do that.
Just talking to people. So that leads me to my next question to you both, is what are some of the frequently asked questions? Why do you run the sprinklers all night? Why do you ice the bogs? Why does that help the berries instead of killing the berries?
Yeah.
So the temperature's at 20 degrees outside. What's the temperature on the bog?
Would you like to talk first?
Yeah, I'll do
It's a
the
20
temperature
degrees
one.
colder.
Yeah.
So cranberries they're a pretty tough plant, and it depends on the time of the year. They're tougher or not as tough. So starting where we are now, the cranberries have been harvested and then they go dormant. If you go to cranberry bog, the leaves are red, so they're not creating chlorophyll. And when they go dormant, they can tolerate certain temperatures. And generally speaking, they can tolerate down to about 18, 20 degrees Fahrenheit. But when it gets below that, particularly with some wind, the bud for next year's crop is already out there. So that little tiny bud on the end of the plant is next year's crop waiting to flower and develop. That's one of the concerns, is that bud can't be damaged. And then the second one is the root system itself. So even though the plants are dormant, they still need a small amount of oxygen. And if that root system gets frozen solid, the plant can't take up any oxygen and you'll have damaged plants. So for those two reasons, when those temperatures occur, the growers will flood the bog with water. And it acts like an insulating blanket for it. Again, they're a wetland plant, so they can tolerate being underwater for long periods of time. They can absorb a small amount of oxygen from that water. The grower will need to routinely measure the oxygen level in the water to make sure that there's enough in there for the plants. But that water will protect the plants from those conditions. And if they can build up enough ice and it gets thick enough before it freezes completely solid, what they'll do is drop the water from underneath that layer of ice.
So they can breathe.
And they can breathe. The ice will settle down, it'll crack, particularly where the ditches are, it allows air to get in there. That's ideal conditions.
Okay.
And we're not seeing that as much these days with climate change, with our changing climate, but that's the ideal way to protect the cranberry plants. So right now,
That means they don't go below freezing.
right below that 18 degrees
Okay.
approximately. They can tolerate in the 20s. The high 20s is not a problem for them.
Okay.
And so the growers will keep the ice on as long as they need to with the climate that we have now. So it used to be typical that right around middle, late December is when water used to go on back
Yeah.
20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
Right after Thanksgiving, back when I was a kid, yeah.
but
We'd
now,
be skating for Christmas.
yeah, that was always the goal, is to be skating by Christmas. But that's, that has changed. That's one of the things that we're seeing. But that's the reason for flooding the bogs in the wintertime.
So as we get these cold temperatures that we're feeling right now, we're starting to just get the water levels up a little bit more. We want to make sure the root system is well saturated. And then if we have an extended period of cold weather, we want to get water completely covering the bogs. Number one, to protect. And number two, we'd like to get enough ice out there that so we could ice sand and drive our little buggies right on the ice to spread that sand.
So why do you ice sand? That must be another question people ask you.
Sand.
Why do you sand? We want to ice skate, and now you sand.
So I grew up about a quarter mile from a cranberry bog and used to skate on the bogs. and then a grower every so often would put sand on the ice. I'm like, oh, he got so mad at us for skating on his bogs that he put sand out there, which now I understand.
And he was a hockey player.
How stupid that is.
Well, you didn't know.
I didn't know, but it's such an important cultural practice, and Steve will talk about that. But it's also, expensive practice. If the grower wanted to stop us from skating, he wouldn't go through the effort of putting sand on it to stop us. He would just be chasing us off every day.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a common misconception is why they're putting the sand up. But Steve can talk about the importance of that.
Yeah, so cranberries ideally would like to have about an inch of sand put on them every 3 years. So we typically like to put it on the ice because it's nice and easy to drive out there. You're not actually putting any pressure or any stress on the vines. So you spread it out there. As the ice melts, it filters down and perfectly covers the cranberry vines. Now, the cranberry vines are kind of like grass. They don't grow that long. I always say it's a little bit like wooden stemmed grass. So, and as the plant grows, it grows about 1.5 inches, 2 inches every year, and eventually the base of the plant becomes the roots. So with sand, when you cover those, it actually helps for that plant to re-root and keep those uprights nice and short. The longer the uprights or the longer the vines, the more chance of fungus and other different problems. And believe it or not, the sand actually provides a certain amount of nutritional value, calcium, things like that. It also, we have a whole bunch of critters, insects that have found us, and a lot of them they overwinter down in the floor of the bog and some of the old leaves and things. And if we cover those up with the sand, then they can't emerge the next year. So it actually helps a whole bunch of different things. Helps with vine density, like I was saying, and we like to have 400 uprights per square foot, and that is kind of ideal. So if we have too much in there, we have problems. And if we have too few uprights, then we're not growing as many cranberries as we can. So the sand is very important. And in recent years, we've had to do some adapting to get the sand out. We haven't had ice the past couple of years. If you're sanding every 3 years, that means that you have to sand 1/3 of your bogs every single year. So if you make easy numbers, 90 acres, you'd have to sand 30 acres every year to keep up with it properly. So we've had to do some adapting, and now we have some new rigs out there that we can sand in the spring. We don't like to drive on the bogs. We drive on them as little as possible, but these have nice wide tires, so the pounds per square inch on the vines is very low.
Okay.
And it actually works out pretty well. We have one grower that purchased a slinger. It's almost like it throws the sand out almost like a wood chipper right out onto the bog, so you never have to go onto the bog. So. I guess the good thing is, about climate change is we're able to adapt. We've got a lot of clever people out there.
Definitely. I was going to ask, how do you do it without ice? But now I know.
Yeah, that's the innovation. That's what the growers do. They can't just sit there and pout. They don't have ice. They got to figure something else out.
Yeah.
So many times I'll go to a small grower and. As a larger grower, sometimes you get a little arrogant, thinking, we know all the answers. No. A lot of times I go to a small grower and say, wow, I can't believe how clever you are with all your ideas. And the industry is, we have a lot of clever people out there that I go to for advice all the time.
And they share. Back to what Steve was saying earlier on about working together cooperatively.
Yeah.
There's, they don't just take their idea and hoard it.
Yeah.
They'll
that's
tell
a
other
really
growers
nice
about
thing.
it, and It helps everybody else out.
So the growing season really kind of starts in March as spring is starting to warm up a bit. And once it starts to warm up, we get our sprinklers out. You'll see folks out there with their sprinkler systems running or part of the bog running. And as they work their way across, putting in sprinklers, more and more sprinklers are on. And then as we get into April, now the vines are starting to come to life. The bud is starting to open up a little bit. And we still get cold temperatures, but as that bud opens up, it becomes a little bit more susceptible to the cold. So we have a whole team that keeps an eye on the bud development and the degree days, so that we know, okay, those vines are becoming sensitive to colder temperatures. And cranberry bogs being the lowest point in the area, at ankle level, the temperature is 15 to 20 degrees colder than at eye level at your house. So if you have a 40-degree prediction at night, it's going to be 25 or maybe even colder on the bogs. So it's a big rush in March to get all of our sprinklers in, because that April time period is starting to become susceptible to a different type of cold than the winter cold. And so each week our group goes out, we look at the bud development on several different varieties, and we do a little calculation to determine, okay, that bud can handle 27 degrees. And when we have a cold night predicted, we have a group that gets together and they do some calculations to determine what their estimated minimum bog temperature is. And we make phone calls when it reaches that point where it's a problem. We have phone calls go out to all the growers to tell them, watch out, tonight's going to be cold, and we're expecting a dangerous frost. It might be a possible frost. And at which point, once the temperature reaches that point on the bog, we turn our sprinklers on. Some guys do it the old-fashioned way. They turn their engines on manually. And many of us now have our systems automated, so that they turn on and off like the furnace in your house. Not that that's fail-safe, but it sure has made life a lot easier.
So that's why you flood the bogs?
So we flood them in the winter,
Late spring.
and then in the spring we actually irrigate them to keep them cold.
Oh, I see.
So.
Okay.
Because as the spring warms up, they can tolerate less and less.
Water.
Less and less cold.
Cold.
Yeah.
So they can tolerate about 18 degrees, 20 degrees at the beginning of spring, early April. Then each week, or depending on how warm it gets, they can start tolerating less. And so the growers have to be more cognizant of the potential for frost damage, because not protecting for frost in the spring, you could lose your entire crop in as little as 30 minutes if it's a really cold night.
Yeah.
And
Call that a black frost.
we had conditions close to that, if not that, this past spring.
May 17th, was it? Yeah.
Right around
I remember
Really?
that, yeah.
That late?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, frost will continue right through June. We've had frost in early July even. It's rare, but it's happened.
And like I was saying, at that ankle level, it's a lot colder. And, at that time, morning, just as the sun is rising, is the coldest time of the day. And I've had times where 4th of July, I had to go out and turn on a pump for just a brief time.
So the other time they flood bogs in the spring is called the late water. It's a cultural practice that was developed probably in the early 1900s, if not earlier. Fell out of favor, but it's becoming more popular again. It's a nice tool to have, and what that does is you don't have to worry about frost during that time period. So it's about a 30-day flood that you'd put on early April or so, mid-April, and you hold it for 30 days.
You keep the water on the bog.
Keeps the water on the bog, so frost is no longer a concern. You do have to worry about warm temperatures because you can get algae building up. That's why 30 days is about the max that we can have here. And then you take the water off, and at that point, you've disrupted a lot of the pest cycles.
I was just thinking, yeah.
So it disrupts your insects, so your insects are down for that year. Your weed development is down because they haven't germinated. And probably the biggest one is it helps with rot. The diseases that are out there affecting the berries, it really helps to prevent the fungi from getting a foothold that growing season. So it's a great cultural practice to help reset your bog. You don't have to frost protect, but the downside to it is you do lose some yield. That's one of the trade-offs, and you can't do it every year on the same bog because it starts to take a toll on the bog. So it's.
And when you said it keeps the insects down, you're talking about the pests, not, dragonflies or whatever.
Yeah, no, it keeps your pests down,
Yeah,
the ones that are
right.
damaging the vines and the berries,
Right.
because again, they're overwintering there oftentimes, and now they can't hatch out and
Yeah.
do their damage.
It's a very clever practice. I remember asking about it years ago.
We have a lot of beneficial insects out there that we
Yeah.
want to take good care of.
Oh, yeah.
And this is one of the ways to do that and still help out our bogs.
Yeah.
And we always encourage, we work with the Cranberry Experiment Station through UMass. We work with Natural Resources and Conservation on strategies like these cultural practices. Let's do the cultural practices before we come in and go with some of the chemicals and other
Right.
things. So it's, and we work together. We have, all of us have pesticide license credits that we have to get every year. So we have workshops all the time, and we want to keep those workshops interesting. So we end up talking about a whole variety of things. We had a scientist come in from NOAA a couple of years ago that I found really interesting. He was talking about the climate change and how the waters in the Gulf of Maine were probably going to be warming faster than any other waters on the planet. So I felt like, wow, we're the epicenter. But all these workshops keep the growers very well informed. So we really have a lot of great information, and a lot of folks are using these cultural practices first before they revert to other methods.
I really like that. It seems like you're years ahead of other agricultural industries in that respect.
It's
to me, it
part of
feels
the
that way.
unique nature of the cranberry plant and the wetland plant that it is, that you can do some of these things that other crops could never consider.
Right.
So it gives us advantages, and it's just really taking advantage of what's already here naturally.
Yeah.
It's not one of these crops that other parts of the country are being forced into that region where they don't really truly grow.
Right.
We're growing them in the natural conditions of which they've been found for centuries. So it's it does give us some advantages, and having the UMass Cranberry Station is affiliated with University of Massachusetts at Amherst. They have a station in Wareham that's been there since 1910, and all they do is study cranberries. And they have PhD caliber scientists in entomology, nutrition, physiology, weed science, you name it. They have a scientist there that's covering it. And so we've been very fortunate as an industry in Massachusetts to have that resource for over 100 years, providing the horticultural science that we need to grow cranberries in a better way, more environmentally friendly, all these things that other crops don't necessarily have that advantage. I mean, UMass certainly has extension that helps other crops, so get me wrong, there's certainly a lot of science behind other ones, but we're unique in that we have a complete research facility dedicated just to cranberries.
Right down the road. Yeah. Exactly.
One really neat thing, we have a team down there that just studies water quality all the time, and it's nice. And these guys, you get to become friends with them over time, so it's easy to call them and say, hey, what do you think of this? And they're really good about being completely, I get my butt kicked every once in a while. No, Steve, don't do that. But it's nice to have those folks to go to make sure you're doing, and we want to do everything right. We want to do right by the environment. We want to do right by the neighbors. It's all so important.
These scientists, I mean, they're passionate. Most of them make their whole career there. They love what they do. They like working with the crop. They like working with the growers. But at the same time, they're scientists. They publish. It's their reputation on the line.
Right.
So what they say is the truth. That they have the science, and they will, like Steve said, they'll sometimes, make their points loud and clear about what's the right way to do something and what's the wrong way. So it's great having that. They're unbiased, but they're there to help our industry. So it's a great resource.
Yeah. So some of the new things we're working on are drones. It's it's not a new technology, but it's something that we're looking into. We have a couple of growers who have tried fertilizing with drones over the past season. There are other applications that we can look into further, absolutely. But in a couple of the growers, I want to make sure that I say this, that we want to proceed with that cautiously, because we don't want to make any mistakes and cause more problems. So, but that's super exciting looking into the future.
I imagine that would be less expensive than using a helicopter to use a drone.
Well, the drones themselves are very expensive.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Yeah. So they're not just the little drones that we might have as consumers, that we play around with. These are larger agricultural, about the size of this table.
Yeah. Never mind.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
There's still a place for the helicopters,
Yeah.
but the drones we may be able to use in those little hard-to-get areas.
Okay.
Spot treats.
And
Instead of applying something to the whole bog, you can just do it to a small area.
Got
They're
it.
just another tool in the toolbox. Once we get it all figured out and understand, there's a lot to it. What height should you be at? What's the width? I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into it.
Sure.
So again, UMass is helping us as well with that, helping the science and working with the regulatory community, making sure we're doing it right. Drones, they're unmanned. That's what they're called. So you got to make sure that who's ever piloting those is competent and licensed.
Right.
So there's a lot to it as well.
So, to sort of wrap things up here, if we can you both tell me briefly some of your challenges that you face in the industry, and also some good things? What cranberries do for our town, for example?
Wow, yeah. So I'm gonna steal something that you said. We're going to start with it, that a healthy cranberry industry is a healthy open space. So
Right.
we like the fact that we provide open space. We like the fact that cranberries are a healthy food. There's a lot of really good health benefits from it. I love working outside, and a lot of times you don't think you have time for dealing with the neighbors, but I love visiting with the neighbors. I love the fact that there are so many hats you wear as a farmer. I mean, in the summer I am straight out farmer, but in the winter I'm on a lot of different committees, and we get to visit with a lot of different organizations, USDA. We're looking into expanding our international marketing, so we get to talk at very high levels. But it's so important, like I said earlier, that it's so important that we make this ourselves more available to the community, and work together so that we keep the open space open, and we keep good relations.
So, from my perspective, I'm not a grower,
I know.
but representing the growers and being in the industry for close to 30 years, know a lot about it, and certainly one of the challenges that I see for the growers themselves is just being economically viable. I mean, there's a lot of challenges out there. The cost of growing cranberries continues to go up each year, and the price that the growers are paid for it, goes up and down depending on the cycle. And right now we're in a okay cycle. We've had some really tough times. 5 or so years ago
Right.
was really pretty bad. So we're on the upswing there, which is good. But certainly keeping growers economically viable is always a concern. And then also another issue that I see is the awareness in our communities about cranberries or agriculture in general. As I mentioned previously, we're not an agricultural literate state. We have a lot of people who just don't understand it. Why a grower is doing this, why they're doing that. So that falls a lot on us at the association to try to get that word out there. Why they're putting sand out there? Why is a helicopter out there? There's a lot of whys, and we can provide some of the whats and the hows behind that. And I think there's just a lot of opportunity with both of those challenges, both economically for the growers and the awareness that we can help, again, working together, getting that message out there, providing access to programs, grants to help the growers so they can do the innovations that they need to do to drive their costs down, get their efficiencies up so they can be viable on their own as growers. So there's a lot of positives that are out there as well. I mean, the negatives are always going to be there, and you can either dwell on the negative or you can try to dwell on the more positive side, and that's where we try to stay. It's not always easy, but that's I think that's just so important, and having people that are interested in understanding. And this the group that I call the hard to educate. Maybe they don't want to be educated, dwell in that negativity zone, and that's fine. But for most people, I think they want to learn, they want to understand.
Yes, I agree.
And the answers might always not be what they want to hear, but at least that's the truth. That's the reasons why things are being done the way they are. So I think it's important to keep pushing that message forward. So I think the industry is in a good place right now. The sales are strong, export opportunities continue to evolve, new products are coming out. There's a whole wide range of products, cranberry products now, and I think there's more to come. So there's a lot of positives, and as Steve said, it's a very healthy berry. I know I'm biased, but I would put this berry, the cranberry, against so many other fruit. It's so high in antioxidants and flavonoids and packs and all these valuable health attributes.
Vitamin C.
And extremely low in sugar. That's the downside because they are tart little berries, but naturally low in sugar, so it's extremely healthy in that regard. Maybe you don't want to pop them in your mouth like you do a blueberry. Cranberry growers do, I do that, a lot of people do, but most people don't, that's
They
understood.
actually are thirst quenching, I find.
Yeah. So I think as we continue to evolve society, we're going to find more and more uses for cranberries. I think we're going to embrace it more, not to medicize it, but there's a lot of health attributes to this berry that I think we've yet to uncover.
Right.
And that's going to be a worldwide phenomenon. So I think that when we sit here in another 50 years, that we're talking about how unbelievably important the cranberry is as a food product across the globe. And we're providing that right here in Massachusetts, right in our backyard, where they've been naturally found for thousands of years.
That's a positive note.
Absolutely. I'm very proud to be a cranberry grower. And it's so unique that wherever I go, I end up conducting a little class on cranberries. And always proud to speak highly of it. And it's just fun to spread the word.
Well, thank you both for being here. Steve Ward, Brian Wick, thank you so much for joining us. Let's do this again.
Sounds great.
Oh, a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us.